It says I can.
That sounds promising. Hey, Jenny, right now, when I click on share screen, it says the host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, I'll work on that too. Okay. I'm gonna go.
And if you want to make me a host, I can help admit people.
Yeah.
It's up to you. I'm going to be.
I am. You are co-host now.
And thank you so much, Ben, for joining us too.
It's still not.
Yep, I'm still working
Okay.
on it. Give me a sec.
Okay.
There we go. I hit the right button for that. So you should be able to now.
Excellent. Yes. I won't do it now, but I will be able to.
Jenny, when I introduce you, you want me to tell them about your hens and your dog?
Sure, it's up to you.
Yeah,
I loved that. Do you get fresh eggs every day?
Yes, pretty much. Yeah. And sometimes they slow down in the winter, but yeah.
I didn't realize Princeton allowed that.
Yeah, no, I actually was one of the people behind the legalization of chickens. I was under the radar with my chickens for a number of years, so I had to come out of the closet and make it legal. But yeah, I've been doing it for, gosh, probably a decade.
Wow.
Yeah, so occasionally we've had to buy store eggs, and I always cry when I do. It's just, I'm so used to free, fresh ones.
How do you keep the foxes at bay?
So I've never had, there was a time when I let them free range, and that's when you'll run into it. But right now they are only out of their run if we are in the yard with them. So between that and the dogs, we don't have problems. Some people do, but we don't.
What kind of dogs do you have?
My dogs are, I have a terrier mix. They're both, rescue dogs. So I've got a terrier mix that's probably 12 years old now. And then I have, we got a pandemic puppy who is like a really big dog, a lab mix. And she is a year and a half now. We're eagerly waiting for 2 to happen. So that
I do. I've got labs.
Do you? Yeah.
Sure.
So
Yeah,
you know all
really
about
makes
it.
A difference in the dog.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, I found out I'm allergic to dogs right after we got the second one. So that makes life interesting.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Joan Goldstein.
Hi, Joan. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. You're certainly going to be talking about something that I'm quite interested in. Yes.
Great. Well, I think we did an interview maybe a year ago.
You were on my show?
Yeah.
Of course, I have your name here, Ben Strauss. Did you ever get the link, Ben?
Yes, you did send it to me. Thank you.
Okay, because you could send it anywhere in the you could send it anywhere in the world, you know.
I know.
Of course, I'm looking down and I see the name Ben Strauss in my book with the HTTPS.
How is it going?
Well, it's going well. I had an environmental engineer on my show this month. His name is Dean Ritz. And he has an interesting story to tell. He feels that working with independent energy companies, he can make sure that they're both environmentally safe at the same time they can make a profit. He says both is possible. which I think is a very interesting idea. So the show is up now.
Terrific.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
up now. Mhm.
Well, I think that's true.
Yes. But isn't it interesting? You see, they're not one against the other. They're not fighting each other. They can support each other. And that's the wonderful story he tells. So it came up last night for the first time.
Great.
So things are going well, except for the world.
Yeah, no kidding.
No kidding. I'm still teaching sociology at the Lewis School, but I'm doing it on Zoom. I have very interesting students, very nice kids, and doing the TV shows and trying to stay awake and alive,
Yeah, no kidding.
doing my best. And sometimes I notice I forget things. I mean, I forget that I signed up for something until I see, like tonight, at the very last minute, I saw that I signed up for this. That's why I'm a little late, just a little late.
That's okay. Good to have you here. I think some other folks are still coming. Freddie, I think, right, it'll be up to you to
Yeah, well, Jenny,
decide when we should
when
start.
do you start? You want to start now or you want to wait?
Yeah.
Whatever you want. No
Yeah.
hurry.
I say it's good to go.
Okay. I'm going to introduce, my name is Freddie Perlmutter, most of you know me, and I'm co-chair of the Adult Education Committee, and I'm going to introduce the program tonight, and I'm very pleased to do that. As you know, this is the second part of a two-part series on climate change. It was co-sponsored by both the Adult Education Committee and the Social Action Committee, and this is the Social Action Committee part. Tonight we have two speakers. The first is Dr. Benjamin Strauss. He's President, CEO, and Chief Scientist of Climate Central. He's the author of numerous scientific papers and reports on sea level rise, and I know I'm going to get this wrong, and is architect of the Surging Seas suite of maps, tools, and visualizations. He's testified before the Senate and presented to state and local officials. He's appeared on National Network News, nationally syndicated radio, and documentary television. He has a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology from Princeton, an MS in zoology from the University of Washington, and a BA in biology from Yale. Our second speaker is Jenny Ludmer. Jenny, as many of you probably know, is co-chair of the Social Action Committee here at the Jewish Center. Jenny is trained in scientific writing and analysis. She's been with Sustainable Princeton for nearly 4 years. She currently serves as program manager and leads the STAR Neighborhood program, in addition to helping the Princeton Public School District achieve their sustainability goals. Established as a 501c3 nonprofit in 2012, Sustainable Princeton works alongside residents, businesses, nonprofits, and local governments to make our community more sustainable. Jenny, as I mentioned, is a member of the Jewish Center. She lives in Princeton with her family, and she has 4 backyard hens and 2 dogs. A few rules. First of all, please mute yourself while the speakers are speaking. Ben Strauss is going to speak first, and then we're going to have a question and answer period. You can unmute yourself and ask questions at that point, or put your questions into the chat. If you do, put it to the chat to the person who's speaking. Then Jenny Ludmer is going to speak, and we're going to have another question and answer period after that. Same rules apply. So please hold your questions for the appropriate question and answer periods. Ben, your turn.
Great. Well, Freddie, thanks so much for organizing this and having us. And Jenny, I think you had an organizing hand too. So really appreciate that and everybody's time this evening. I'm, instead of giving a kind of formal presentation on kind of climate issues and impacts, I've taken the liberty of maybe sharing a few stories, touching on a couple issues through the stories, and also a bit of a slideshow tour of some of the things that kind of little old Climate Central here in Princeton has done and is doing some of the things coming down the pike. And we've got a nice intimate group. So please don't hesitate to like raise your hand or send a chat while I'm talking if something's unclear. Also, if you have questions about something, if we have time in the format, by the time I get to the end and you have questions just about climate impacts and issues that I didn't even talk about, like I'm happy to go wherever your curiosity might lead us. But don't hesitate to type questions in the chat as I go, or raise your hand using the little icons. And then we'll just open it up more to discussion after. But I'm going to start with a little slideshow. And does everyone see a picture of a bunch of blocks of ice in a circle? Yeah, okay. So this was a photograph taken in Paris in 2015 during the Paris climate talks. It's actually a scene, it's not my photograph, but I stumbled across this as I was walking. I was there for the climate talks and just discovered this going from point A to point B. And it's a really interesting piece of art, very profound to me. The Danish artist Olafur Eliasson took a tugboat out to Greenland, and he essentially lassoed 12 giant icebergs that had recently calved from the ice sheet on Greenland. And he towed them to Copenhagen and loaded them up on trucks and brought them into Paris and arranged them in the places of the hands of the clock. And he called it Ice Watch. And it was in place before the talks started, and then was just slowly melting during the climate talks. And so it's interesting, it's arranged like the face of a clock, like a watch, but we're watching it and we're slowly watching the ice melt. And the most profound thing to me about it as a sea level rise scientist is the idea that we know what's going to happen here, right? There's no question about that. We don't know exactly how long it will take for the ice to melt, but we know it will melt. And and it also tells you something, that ice takes its time, right? So it relates to a body of science that's been, to some research that's been done by others, and I've joined in to the field. We research something we call sea level rise commitment, or lock-in, which is the study of how much sea level rise in the long run, meaning like hundreds and thousands of years, like do we sign up for based on pollution we put in the atmosphere today. So for instance, the ice sheets on Greenland and Antarctica haven't yet caught up to the amount of warming that we've already created. I kind of imagine if the ice on those, in those remote places were all stored in giant banks of freezers, each of which depended on its power supply. And every ton of carbon we put in the atmosphere is kind of like unplugging another freezer. Well, when you unplug the freezer, the ice is still in the freezer. Now you know it's going to melt, but it's going to take time. So there's a certain amount of sea level rise out there that's going to happen if we stop polluting tomorrow. The sea level is going to keep on rising. It's going to happen. But then we can look at different things we do over the next few decades, and the paths diverge wildly. So no matter what we do between now and the middle of the century, the amount of sea level rise we get by the middle of the century is going to be about the same. But if we choose path A, it could condemn our descendants to see, tens of feet of sea level rise over the coming few centuries. Just what we do over the next few decades. drowning all the major coastal cities and beyond. Or it could be just a few feet more, depending on the path. So we at Climate Central have created a whole bunch of visualizations to try and capture this idea and really bring it home in iconic places. We released some of those images actually for the Paris meeting, but a much bigger set we published right before the Glasgow climate talks last fall. We created a resource called Picturing Our Future. I encourage folks to check it out. And here's just a flavor of what we're talking about. This is a Google Earth image of Buckingham Palace in the UK with present day sea level. Now here's the unavoidable future sea level rise due to carbon we've already put in the atmosphere. And if you look carefully, I'm going to go back in the lower left-hand corner, right? We go from green to water creeping in there onto the grounds. And next I'm going to show what the projected sea level rise is if we limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is basically the most ambitious target that anyone thinks might be possible. A lot of people think it's out of reach by this point. Here's 1.5 degrees. What happens after 1.5? And then next comes 2 degrees, which is a kind of more realistic, but still a lot less than the path we're on. And now we can move up to 3 degrees. We're currently on a path to put us near 3 degrees by the end of this century and more after. And so we're really on a path that eventually gets us to around 4 degrees right now, by the time we're done adding carbon to the atmosphere. So images like this are meant to, illustrate what are the stakes, what are the choices, how are we going to be remembered? And besides producing images like these for, I think, a couple hundred locations around the world, about 100 cities that you can explore on the website, that you can share with people that you know, different parts of the world. We also made maps. So beyond those couple hundred locations, you can look at a map of any place in the world to get a sense of what could be affected. So here, again, we're looking at London. It shows the UK because that's where the climate talks were, but I could just easily have pulled up maps of New Jersey or New York or anywhere around the coastal US. And the purple shows areas that would be below the future sea level in our projection if we warm by 1.5 degrees Celsius. If we do a good job and really cut emissions, right, that's the future. But the yellow shows areas that would additionally be affected if we warm up to 2 degrees. So essentially the yellow shows places that could be saved or protected if we limit to 1.5 instead of 2. And now I'll move up to show what would be saved compared to 3 degrees warming if we were at 1.5. It's closer to our current path, 3 degrees. So going down to 1.5 is actually pretty substantial. And 4 degrees, again, not far off from our path. 1.5 is looking a lot better than 4. And you can explore this. We've made this available for any place in the country. We've also gone outside of Google Earth and made photorealistic renderings of a number of scenes around the world, again, all based on scientific projections. Here's a scene in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, after 3 degrees warming, the sea level projection. And then next, but what if we limit to 1.5 degrees? It's a totally different outlook. And here is the world's tallest building in Dubai, completely with its toes wet, the whole downtown underwater in the 3 degree scenario. And again, completely avoided if we can limit to 1.5. Here's an ancient temple of literature in Vietnam, Hanoi, after 3 degrees or 1.5. And coming closer to home, the National Mall, the capital, after 3 degrees or 1.5. So we have a big choice. And this fall, myself and some of my colleagues, this was our kind of crew that went out to Glasgow for the climate talks. And we did our best to share these images and the message of this idea of the choice that we have, of the legacy that we're going to pass on. This is a colleague on the screen, not standing up, being essentially a correspondent for lots of TV around the United States, reporting on what was happening in Glasgow. This is me. I don't normally love to show kind of images of myself on TV, but this was a special story. We kind of worked to the very last drop. And on my last night there, I found a BBC reporter and I said, look, we've got these images that could really help you storytell. And she was quite interested. And she said, oh, can I interview you tomorrow? Because I'm done now for tonight. And I said, no, I'm leaving tomorrow morning. Well, she said, maybe my colleague who has the morning shift would want to do this. And so, she wrote him and I went home. I packed up my stuff. I got all ready. So I was ready early in the morning and I got an email like at 7. Yeah, come on to the studio. So on the way to the airport, I stopped off at their studios. This was a live studio shot like across the river from the meeting, and got to do this interview and show a lot of the visuals on BBC. And then I got to the airport and I was waiting to board and saw this on the wall of the airport. So that was just a fun and honestly like a special life experience that I never would have expected. So we did, beyond the BBC, we got a tremendous amount of coverage. Again, like our small band here at Climate Central. On the far right, don't worry, these images found their way into thousands of stories around the world, more than 100 countries, many billions of media impressions when you multiply it by the circulation. Another illustration, this was actually from, I think, an earlier study, but it just was a slide that was available to illustrate sometimes like, the global interest. And I find this encouraging, right? The global interest in these stories and this kind of imagery. These are front page stories from around the world covering our sea level research and mapping. So, and then actually I'm gonna do a little shuffle here for a moment. There we go. And we also do it, everything I've shared so far has been far in the future and connected to COP and generally far away. We've also got stuff that's quite close to home. Here's our map. It's a global map, but you can look up, downtown Atlantic City here, for instance, and what's an actual projection for just a few decades from now, sea level rise plus a kind of average worst of the year flood. And so this is something you can explore at coastal.climatecentral.org. Anytime, anywhere, any decade. I want to kind of pause for a moment and just kind of give a sense of the why here, why we do, what we're about at Climate Central. And it's really about communicating climate change in effective ways so that people can hear. And in my belief, this is such a big and pressing problem that it's going to take an effort that lasts decades and that touches essentially every sector of the economy. We're going to need it's an all hands on deck kind of effort. And to make something like that work, we need, in my view, deep cultural change, a shift in values. And so our mission at Climate Central, my mission is to try and reach as many people as we can in ways that are as effective as possible to help bring about that sort of change. I don't pretend to be smart enough to know what the specific, there is no silver bullet, but I guess I have more confidence in the idea of more and more people working on this problem with all of their smarts and passion and ingenuity than I do in the idea that any one person, myself included, right, has the best idea or has a great idea about a specific thing to do. So I really like this effort to try and reach and move large numbers of people in important places. And so we do that. We have a few strategies guided by social science to try and be as effective as possible and as ubiquitous as possible. One is to make the story local as much as we can. I just showed you images from around the world, but each was local. The problem becomes more manageable and more personal when it's framed locally. We work to have the messages and information delivered by trusted messengers. That's critical. To make it visual, we're a very visual species. To make it frequent, that's known to be important. So, and of course, everything has to be accurate, grounded in science for credibility. So I'm just going to share a couple of really exciting projects we have in the pipeline. Here again is picturing our future and the kind of images we've known, those giant spikes on the graph I showed you, how much people are moved to, by images like this, how interested they are. What if we could make those images for kind of every home near the shore? What if we could find a way to, at scale, create realistic images so you can look up your house, your block, your town under different sea level rise scenarios or even flood scenarios if a hurricane is coming? This is a simulated image, well, really an AR photograph with the water digitally put in, but in an automated way from a video game engine, but highly accurate, right, within a couple inches. Through a system we're building called Flood Vision. And here's a look. This is a built in your garage by us, a scientific instrument on the rooftop of the car. This is generation number 1. We drive around and take photographic data and also laser rangefinder LiDAR data. We fuse them. This is a kind of abstract art look at all of the laser dots superimposed over an image. Yeah, so that's a big project that we've actually spent the last couple of weeks driving all through, Wildwood and Atlantic City and tons of different New Jersey communities where this is actually slowly happening. It's a great kind of mad scientist moment for us. I want to pivot briefly to a couple of our other programs. We work with TV meteorologists. Speaking of trusted messengers, here's Al Roker using data and graphics that we provided to help integrate climate into his storytelling. And more importantly, we work with almost half of the nation's local TV meteorologists, close to about 1,000. Here's just a sense. You've got English, Spanish, impact, solutions, TV, social media. That gives you a sense of the geographic coverage. I'll skip this. This is just a really nice video. He's talking about how there was enough wind in Texas to basically power every home in the state and more on a particular day. This is a tool we've got that we're quite excited about that gives a daily forecast based on weather, but also local installed wind capacity and solar capacity, daily forecast of how much renewable energy is generated. We can't do this. Oh, I'm gonna skip over that. And during the course of this program, we've moved meteorologists from being just about halfway convinced that the climate is changing to 95% as the only group working in this space. During the same period, the American public moved from 57% to 71%. And then finally, I'll just say, and I want to be quick, another area that we're working is on the attribution of extreme weather events or not so extreme weather events to climate change. meaning kind of quantifying the climate change fingerprint on what happened. Here, we participated in a study showing that climate change made Hurricane Harvey's downpour 3 times more likely. And that was, we instigated a National Academy of Sciences report. And really, I think we're able to help accelerate a change in narrative that was very apparent this last summer when you kind of see the lower left headline here in the New York Times, climate change batters the West before summer even begins. So it was hot, fires were starting, and how does New York Times describe that? As climate change. That did not happen before last summer. You just did not see that in the media. So we're really proud of helping to bring about that change in the high level narrative. And now we've got this other project brewing in the pipeline of being able to quantify, put a number on the climate influence or fingerprint on daily local temperatures everywhere in the world. So we want to revolutionize the way weather is reported and change your weather forecast every day, bring climate into it. All because of this increase in carbon dioxide. And you've probably seen a picture like this before, this amount of carbon dioxide over the last million years, showing in the last 100 years how much we've done. And we recently put together a graphic that illustrates this, I think, even more powerfully. You can see the unnatural part here, the jump in the last century above the natural trend up and down. But what if instead of showing the total carbon dioxide level, we just showed the change in carbon dioxide every 1,000 years? This is the same time period, last 800,000 years, and you can see the natural wiggles. And then that last line at the end is the last 1,000 years. And of that line, almost all of it is the last 100 years. And the 100 years before that, we were already getting active. So if, I don't think this group has any doubts that, we're pushing pretty hard in the atmosphere, but I think this image really brings it home. Having said that, I just want to wrap by saying, we know how to solve the problem. Like, climate change is a hard problem. It can seem overwhelming, but to me, it is the easiest hard problem compared to poverty, war, disease, injustice. It is the easiest problem. We know exactly what we have to do. And it's just that the clock is ticking. And each moment, each year really matters. But I find the most hope in kind of thinking about what I call a force multiplier strategy. There's only, I by myself, I can't do, there's only so much I can do. And if that's all I can do, great, that's meaningful. But to me, talking to other people, trying to influence other people, your different circles, your family, your friends, the company that you work for, the school that you're part of, the community that you're part of, the country that you're part of. If you can find ways to work to influence those different circles, you can be a force multiplier. And at the end, that's what we're all about through these communication strategies. So I will stop it there, and I think we have maybe around 10 minutes for questions. Is that about right? Okay. And you can ask about things I've shown, but you can also ask, any climate question that's on your mind, I'm happy to get into.
I have actually a very simple question.
Yeah.
You mentioned 4 degrees centigrade. How much is that in Fahrenheit?
Yeah, that's about 7.2, or it's exactly 7.2 Fahrenheit. I know we normally do Fahrenheit except for these global targets because the whole world puts them in centigrade. But, honestly, like I think of the numbers as labels for different scenarios, not as numbers. because the average change, whether it's 4 degrees or 7 degrees, to me, that's not very meaningful. Like what's more meaningful is like, how does the map change? What does that mean for what happens to this place? What happens to that place? What happens to these people and to those people? So that's the kind of translation that we're always trying to do. And, one of the misunderstandings about climate change, more than 90% of the extra heat that the Earth system is absorbing is going into the oceans. So the 1.5, 2, 3, 4 degrees, that's warming the air, the atmosphere. That's like a little sliver of what's going on, actually. The great mass of it is warming the oceans.
So Ben, I'm wondering about, I love that the New York Times is talking about climate change. What about Fox News? What about those other places?
Yeah. Yeah, so Fox News is interesting. I mean, cable Fox is not, but we have been able, like a lot of the work we do getting meteorologists to talk about climate, right, on their local TV station, that's on all the networks. Like we're on a ton of Fox stations. The image I showed at the start with my colleague on screen, it was Fox News in Charlotte, but like the Fox local station. We're also on the Sinclair, so local TV stations are owned by lots of different ownership groups. So NBC does own some, and CBS and ABC do, and so does Fox. But then there are lots of entities you might never have heard of. One is Sinclair, which is to the right of Fox. And their headquarters, their national unit came to us and asked to collaborate on a climate story that talked about sea level rise and climate change that they sent out to all their stations. So we feel that, and it's part of our strategy. We don't advocate for policy. We're really about just communicating, accurately and effectively. And so, I think there's a growing receptivity to climate content across the political spectrum, except maybe the last 20%. I mean, we're not going to spend our time hitting our head against the wall of the most dug-in skeptics. I think there are plenty of Americans who either are concerned or are becoming concerned, could become concerned without, or, are movable. Like, let's focus on the movable group as opposed to the really dug-in end of the spectrum.
Can I make 2 comments? First of all, I thought your ideas of making it local are so powerful. I mean, that really brings it home to people. But also your images, your graphics were really wonderful. A picture tells, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Everybody knows that. So if we were wanting to use some of your images or graphics, is that something that can be arranged?
Oh yeah, just come to our website and download them.
Oh, it's that. Okay.
That's it. Yep, it's all there to use.
Okay,
and,
thank you for being here.
And I should also add that our website should, in about a month, we'll be publishing a totally brand new website that ought to be a lot easier to navigate and find stuff on. But as far as the sea level images are concerned, picturingourfuture.org is already really easy to navigate, well organized. You can find those images. What we do with the TV meteorologists, by the way, the 1,000 plus that we work with, is every week we send them TV ready graphics, and most of the time they're localized to that meteorologist's market. So, we do that for more than 200 media markets every week. If the trend, we just sent out a spring package about how spring is getting warmer and so forth, right? So we'll give you your trend line for whether it's Albany, New York, or Fresno, California, or wherever you are. What you get from us is your local picture, so to speak. So it's kind of, we try and the legs of the stool are science, communication, and technology.
What's your prognosis for the upcoming summer?
Hot. Yeah, I don't. It's actually it's much harder to do short range forecasting. Like in the old days, like people used to kind of come up to me, or you'd hear the argument, oh, you know, the weather forecasters, they can't even tell me if it's going to rain tomorrow. How can you possibly tell me what the climate's going to be like in 10 or 100 years? And my answer to that is, yeah, okay, I can't tell you if it's going to rain tomorrow, but, well, let's say here we are in March. I'm willing to bet my entire life savings with you that August 3rd is going to be hotter than March 3rd. Would you like to take that bet, you know, here in Princeton, New Jersey? Sometimes you can make a long-term projection with a lot more confidence than a short-term projection. And so, yeah, so I don't have, like, usually NOAA releases a kind of seasonal well, they do release seasonal prognoses like ahead of upcoming seasons, but I haven't seen them yet for summer.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'll also just say, since this is, you know, I'm curious if, like, in this group, like, you encounter skeptics, or that feels like a problem. I generally think that, like, trying to have a heated argument on the facts, it's usually not going to work the way the psychology is. But the most common argument that comes up is, well, you know, climate has changed naturally before, and so I think this is a natural change. And it's useful to have a response to that in your back pocket. And so first is to say, well, yeah, of course, just because something could be natural doesn't mean it is. And so I like to say, well, yeah, there are natural forest fires, right? Like, there were forest fires before there were people. The lightning would strike somewhere in the woods. But does that mean it's impossible? You know, does that mean it's okay to walk into a dry forest with a blowtorch? You know, no. Does it mean it's impossible for there to be a human-caused forest fire? No. And, you know, how can you tell the difference? You know, you do an investigation, right? Did the fire start in a remote area during a storm? Or did it start on a clear day near a campground? You know, there are some simple investigations you can do to tell the difference. And essentially, the whole body of climate science, the thousands of studies that have been conducted, are that investigation. And they overwhelmingly show that this particular climate change that we're living through right now, and that is just beginning, it clearly has human fingerprints all over it. So I think we're probably at a good time to transition to you, Jenny.
Yeah.
And speaking of local, right? It's so important to do the local work.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I will start by sharing my slideshow as well. And thank you to everyone. Thanks to Ben for his presentation, but also thanks to all of you for joining us for this, or tuning in later. So yeah, first I want to just start, before I dive in, of telling you a little bit about our organization. We work with residents, businesses, nonprofits, and local governments, and now local schools, to make our community more sustainable. We typically work in 3 different pillars. We are undergoing efforts to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, to strengthen our resilience to climate change, so recognizing that it's already here, how are we going to protect ourselves? And then protecting our local ecosystem. We are a very small team. We're up to 4 full-time staff now, though, which is exciting. We have grown, and we are a really strong team that works well together, and we've got our work cut out for us. We definitely are working hard to make change happen locally. We led the development of Princeton's Climate Action Plan. So if you're not yet familiar with that, I recommend you check it out. It's full of actions. I believe there were 85 listed. I'm happy to report that a number of these actions are underway. One of them was working with the municipality to source renewable energy for Princeton residents. That program is on pause now, but that is an area where we've worked in the past, and we intend to bring it back as the energy market makes it available to us. We just are starting to initiate a Sustainable Minds series, which is replacing our earlier Great Ideas series. But the idea behind this is to share some of respected thought and action leaders with you about different topics. And then, as I mentioned before, we're currently working with the municipality and the school, Princeton Public Schools, to initiate their sustainability initiatives and seek funding for them when we can. So I don't have any of the graphics, although I am guilty of borrowing Climate Central's graphics here and there, and I appreciate that they are widely available. What we do have are a few photographs. The one on the left, you might see the little Princeton sign. That's the Harrison Street Bridge after a flood several years ago. The one on the right, I'm not positive, but it looks like River Road to me. I drive that one frequently. And so we already know climate change is here. We're seeing it happen by us. Quaker Road, I'm sure you see that road's closed sign up quite a bit when the water is too high. And then there's that river that can swell massively after a heavy rain that's right beside that bridge. Of course, you know the other impacts of trees going down, how that damages properties, how it blocks roads, how basements in Princeton are often experiencing the sogginess like this one is showing you. And all of that is real. It's an effect of what the local climate data shows us. This is Mercer County's annual precipitation, and you can see that pink line is subtle, but it is increasing. The thing that really strikes me about this data is highlighted by the gray bar at the top. And those are the peaks that we had not seen in, the past. This is more than 100 years, but now we are regularly seeing that it's getting that high. Sorry. So similarly, temperature data is much more striking. You can see that line shooting right up. And when you compare the first 10 years of this graph around 1900 to the 10 years now, we're talking about a difference of almost 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's substantial. And again, this is right here in Mercer County. So even though you might and I might find solace in my air-conditioned house, imagine the people that work outside for a living and deal with this, the landscapers, the construction workers, but even yourself when you want to be outside and you can't on those days that are too hot. And so like our Ben, our climate scientist that was here tonight, I am also unnerved by this. I know many of us are, but that's why I want to turn this now and talk about what you can be doing, right? Because there are, as Ben was saying, we do have a choice and there are things that we can do. So the way to deal with this, I like to suggest that people think about 4 different areas. A lot of times people come to us and they say, hey, I am recycling, I'm doing this great job. That's it, right? I'm doing it. And I want to thank people for that. That is important, but I also want to steer them back to these 4 areas. And the reason, I can tell you when we talk about the first one, which is looking at your home, we know from Princeton's greenhouse gas inventory that 2/3 of our carbon emissions are from our buildings and our homes. So looking at your home and thinking about how you can make it as energy efficient as possible. The good news with this is that that saves you money. It translates into financial savings. So why pay for energy that you don't need to use? So one of the easiest things you can do and probably many of you already have, is to go through your house and switch LED bulbs. That will save you a lot of money on your utility bill and then reduce the amount of energy you're using. Definitely a programmable thermostat, making sure you're programming it also when you put it in so that you do have those times that you're not reaching the peak comfort when your house is empty. An advanced trick, but one which is very effective, is having a home energy audit done. There is a quick energy check now available from the utility, which is free. There's also a more thorough 3-hour audit where they really go through your home carefully, and that you can get done for $50. There is a fee, but that's available. But also just smart thermostats. Even if you're renting, you can do that sort of stuff. Looking, even if you're a do-it-yourselfer, caulking up your windows, making sure your doors are sealed. Those are all the good tips to reduce the amount of money you're spending on energy. And then when you replace appliances, look for the Energy Star logo because those are the most energy efficient. So in terms of transportation, this is the second area we love for people to focus on for the Princeton greenhouse gas inventory. This is about 1/3. So 2/3 was your home, about 1/3 is your transportation. And with this, every time you leave your gas vehicle in the driveway, that's saving you money on gasoline. So that's a good thing to think about. Public transportation is pretty well available, so figuring out how you might incorporate that into your life is a good idea. Do you have the ability to carpool to work or to any of your regular events? That picture on the bottom is my electric bike. So if you are on a bike, consider an electric bike too, because it can take you farther and faster than, but still using your pedaling. So maybe you'll find you use that more for commuting or for other activities. Obviously, scooters. If you're on campus, you'll see a lot of young students with scooters. If you are still in, and I have a picture of an electric vehicle. Of course, that's also something I'm going to recommend. They are incredibly affordable now. They're very widely available as well. There's been a dramatic increase in that market. So that's an area you can go to. And if you are still in a gas vehicle, then not idling is really the best thing you can do to avoid the emissions from that. It is a law in New Jersey not to idle, but obviously that's a tough one that not everyone is aware of. The other thing that we like to point you to is your lawn, like looking at how you're taking care if you have a property, how are you managing it? A lot of times we like to encourage the idea for people to think of their lawn as a part of the solution. Think of it as the local ecosystem. So trees in particular absorb thousands and thousands of gallons of stormwater every year. So the more trees you can put in your ground, in your property, not only supports wildlife, but also is absorbing and preventing all the stormwater, helping to alleviate flooding is what I'm trying to say. So native plants and native trees are what we're always going to recommend. They are uniquely adapted to our environment, so they don't need the extra watering, the extra fertilizer, all of these things that when you take a foreign plant and put it in the ground require. You can think about turning part of your lawn into a meadow. You can think about incorporating a rain garden. That's my front yard on the right. I try to act as well as talk about this stuff. So that was something I put in my yard, I think, 2 years ago. You can also think about shifting away from gas-powered lawn equipment. There are electric mowers available and on the market now. There are several landscapers that use electric landscaping equipment now as well. And then mulching leaves into the lawn or putting them in a pile to be composted rather than putting them on the street where they, the town, it's a costly effort for the town to pick them up, is not only financially, but from a greenhouse gas perspective, when that's actually a resource that you could keep in your lawn in many cases to feed your lawn. And then we'd also like to have you think about what you're purchasing. You know, recycling and dealing with the waste once you have it is important, but the emissions from the product are happening long before you've even bought items. So the average household in New Jersey is generating over 45,000 pounds of waste a year. You know, how can you modify your purchases to reduce this? What idea is to host low waste events? As we start to get back to hosting events, I would encourage you to think about having a large supply of party wear. So the dishwasher picture on the right are these plates that you can buy that are made from number 5 plastics that you recycle. And so having a stack of those in a box that you just break out for a party and then you put them in your dishwasher and then you put back in that box until your next party is always a great idea, rather than using the paper plates that you throw away. The giving up single-use disposables, bringing your own water bottle, packing your lunch in washable dishes, those are all great ideas too. We certainly love to encourage giving the gift of experience, you know, going out with your kids or your grandkids to do, go to a theater or go to an aquarium like the picture and make that a gift that they would really enjoy rather than items. And look at how you can repair items. That's why I have the picture of the sewing machine. Some of us still know how to use. You know, can you repair that? Do you have to throw it out? When you are getting rid of items, of course, think about donating them. And then opting out of junk mail is also a really great way to lower your waste and you know, just prevent the hassle of getting mail that you don't want. So thank you for thinking about each of these 4 options. And of course, thank you to the team that I work with. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. If anybody has anything about anything I said. Yeah, go ahead, Louise. I see you now. I'm going to stop the share.
Okay. So, you know, we recently resettled an Afghan family out at the edge of town out by ETS. So they're a large family and recycling is a totally new concept. And you can imagine they've got 8 kids running around, and trying to educate them is not easy. And of course, we're looking for graphics, really nice, catchy graphics that we can put on the bins. And I think you're a good source of that. So do you have something you can suggest?
Yeah, there are a couple of organizations, and I'm not going to remember them off the top of the head, but I can certainly send that to you, Luis. There are a couple of organizations that make these graphics. I can also provide you with something that I've made in the past that might be better for the local. But if you need a large number for different bins, there are stickers you can get and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm happy to send
One
that to you.
family in particular.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
That would be great. Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, no problem.
No, I can pick it up from you. You can drop it off. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
Jenny, this is Peter here. What do you recommend as an alternative to the current grass lawns that we all have?
Yeah.
Is it possible to even think about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great thing to think about. You know, a lot of us love those manicured lawns, but I mean, isn't a native flower bed just as beautiful? So I learned a fun fact from the watershed that a forest has the ability to absorb 550,000 gallons of water a year. A meadow has the ability to, and that's 1 acre, to absorb 500,000 gallons of water a year. So flowers that can attract pollinators that are native, many of them have incredibly deep roots, like we're talking 8 and 10 feet deep. They are very good at absorbing water, providing pollination, and they're beautiful to look at. So I think it's a lovely idea. The other thing to think about are trees. There are, you know, a lot of people think, oh, a willow, it absorbs a lot of water. There's actually a tree benefit calculator that can tell you which ones. I can tell you it's the hard species that you think about locally, like oaks, are going to be some of the strongest trees to put in the ground in terms of water capturing potential. The willow grows very, very fast, but it doesn't absorb nearly as much as like a sycamore or an oak tree does. So either one of those options are great ones.
I heard about that instead of grass, using dandelions and clovers. You get the same effect, but it's a lot healthier. But I
Yeah.
don't know if you dare to start that in a
Yeah.
suburb.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. I certainly the bees would love that as well. I haven't read anything to how, you know, what I don't know how native those species are, so I'm not sure that I can comment that way, but um, I think it's a great idea. Anything else?
I want to share on the recycling thing that when I was in college, some peers and I were we able to organize this big campus Earth Summit and in the early 90s. And so that we had delegates coming up from around the country, but also internationally. And we were totally schooled by the Australians who said, yeah, reduce, reuse, recycle, like the 3 R's. What's that? It's like, no, there are 5 R's, you know, refuse, then repair, you know, then, you know, reduce, reuse, and recycle. So
Yeah. No, I love that. That's a good thing. And yeah, it's unfortunate because I feel like a lot of those repair skills have been lost.
yeah.
And obviously, I'm not talking about Peter because he's one of
No.
the people who hasn't lost them. But I think the average person has.
But although I think, you know, a lot of these things take systems change on some level in organization because stuff is no longer made in a way
Yeah.
where it can be repaired, right? So
Right.
much stuff.
Yeah,
So
no,
you have,
absolutely.
yeah.
You mentioned that Sustainable Princeton is doing work with the schools. Are you teaching this stuff in the school?
No.
In school? Because certainly that age range is the one that really needs to, I mean, everybody needs to know about it, but at least if they learn it in school, they're more apt to carry it through than people, you start with people in their 60s and 70s and then have to do it.
Yeah, no, you're right. So my work isn't actually teaching the students, but I can tell you that the state of New Jersey now has climate teaching standards for all schools in New Jersey. And just because I have children at the Princeton public schools, I can tell you that the science teachers are usually very attuned to this topic and are teaching it well. I know I was just talking to a teacher at the high school level, and they used to have one teacher do the environmental studies class, and now they have two because they had so many kids. As they're getting older, more and more kids care about this topic, we know, and more wanted to take the classes. So I love hearing things like that. They had to expand the number of teachers so they can meet the need of the students. So yeah, my work mainly with the school district is helping the administration. So we're looking into the possibility of a number of energy efficiency projects, solar one day, maybe electric buses if we can get the funding to come to our town. That's the kind of work that we are helping them with.
Also, I know there's a project underway, or at least being looked at, for solar for the temple. Do you know anything about it?
So yeah, I know that's something that Martin Ettenberg has focused on as his role on the House committee. So yes, I know that there are discussions underway, and I think that they are just in the process of finalizing a decision. There are a number of decisions that have to happen. Are you going to buy the panels, or are you going to lease them? And there are variations in between. So I think they're just trying to make that decision. But I know that it's definitely an active topic of conversation now, which is great. So, well, one other thing, I want to take off my Sustainable Princeton hat and also just follow up the wonderful presentation that you brought to the Jewish Center, Freddie, and just remind people about the idea of the Dayenu circles. And I don't know if anybody wants to speak to this that was able to attend. The reason I'm taking off my Sustainable Princeton hat when I bring this up is that we don't advocate. So these Dayenu circles are advocation efforts. So I love the idea of talking about it with you, but I'm not doing it from my professional role, just to make sure you understand that. So, sorry, did someone say something? Oh, no. Okay. So the idea is that people would join together and become a voice in response to the climate crisis. So it's a way to act, politically act, lobbying, and that sort of thing, and not feel so helpless in all of this. So I'm curious if there's interest amongst this group in that, or what your thoughts are on it.
Well, I will probably want to be engaged. I'm out of town right now, but I didn't want to miss this. So when I get back, I'll be in touch and see how I can do my small part. But it's all very. I applaud you both for the work that you're doing. It's getting to feel just crisis mode, and obviously you both have came to that conclusion probably quite a while ago. That and actually, Ben, that was one question I wanted to ask you. I think you had a slide up that showed the way perception of the climate change has changed over the years. And I believe you had the individual perception was up to 71% of people who did ultimately realize that the climate change is an issue of real concern. Was that, what population was that?
Yeah.
Was that in the United States?
So the slide I showed was actually a survey of a very narrow group, which is, there are a couple thousand TV meteorologists in the country, and this was a survey of a subset of them, so probably a few hundred. And it showed that they went from 54% to 95% over 6 years in the United States. But then I mentioned that during the same period, that the American public went from 54% to 71%. So the point I was making was that there was a much bigger change for the TV meteorologists. So that's something that we've always felt that we had a hand in. But there's a great resource, and I put it back in the chat. If you can access the chat, there's just click on the chat button, and there's a link to the Yale Climate Opinion Maps. So you can just Google Yale Climate Opinion Maps 2021, and they survey twice a year, kind of 1,000 Americans sampled across the country in elaborate ways to get their climate opinions. And it's a really great resource. You can see where people's attitudes are, I don't know, there's like 30 questions they track, and that you can look at the level of the nation or a state or even a county. Although the county, it's not a direct measurement. They have a whole model to kind of imagine what the county should be, what they think it probably is.
So do you have the sense from all the data that you're seeing? I did see it in the chat, and I'll follow it. But do you have the sense that that recognition is increasing among?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, I think Peter asked, what's the prognosis for this summer? I don't know, but last summer was obviously terrible, right, from a climate point of view, and that coincided with this entirely new narrative that the media was telling. I mean, I saw it in the Times and the Post, and I couldn't listen to NPR without them saying fires, climate change, heat, climate change, right, drought, climate change,
right,
and so this survey that's been going on for about 10 years, twice a year, in the whole time that they've been watching, I mean, they've actually been going for about 15 years, but 10 years continuously. So last summer, there was an all-time record for the amount of media coverage on climate in North America. And there was also a record jump in American public opinion from the spring to the fall on climate. So it does make a difference when people both, experience the effects of climate change and they get told that is climate change, right? Because I think we're all experiencing the effects to some degree all the time, but the stickers aren't there to tell you that it's climate change. That's sometimes what I think our job is as an organization, but also as individuals. Like if people don't talk about climate change very much, although that's changing. And if we can just start putting stickers in all the places they belong, right, that's going to help.
Ben, can you hear me? Yes. I would certainly be interested in having you and perhaps Jenny come back onto my TV show. I think when you came on, it was after Hurricane Ida, wasn't it? When we talked about the hurricane?
I don't remember for sure.
Yeah.
But that would be a lot of fun. You can email me about it another time. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And if Jenny wants to come on also in terms of lifestyle, which she's addressing lifestyle, which is certainly very important as well. Also, I teach college sociology, into a private school in Princeton for kids with learning disabilities. And I'm actually bringing up climate change this week.
Oh,
And so,
wow.
yeah, right. So, you know, I think we can do a lot towards your goal and my goal, which is to make people conscious and aware of problems that they not only need to address, but they can address.
Yeah.
That's the important thing. That's your message that is so important, I think. Things that we can do and things that we can change. So by all means, can we connect with each other? Well, you can get me through the Jewish Center also. Yes, and sorry, my throat's going. I'm certain that when Ben came on, I had been directly affected by a hurricane. I had fallen down in my apartment. I'm in community housing, and I had to call an ambulance to take me to the hospital. And they did, and but the doctors were very happy to find out that nothing had been broken, but a few things had been pulled. And so they put me outside and left me there. And I said, how am I going to find my way home? And nobody seemed to care. We had just had Hurricane Ida. They said that the Princeton roads were blocked. You couldn't go into Princeton. The roads were blocked. So finally, somebody gave me a card of a taxi driver, and I called the taxi driver, and he came there, and he wanted tons of money, and he wouldn't move the taxi until he had his hand like, more, until I gave him God knows how much money to get me home. But I wasn't going to sit all night at the hospital. But anyway, that was my memory of Hurricane Ida. And what is so important is, what did I discover? The very roads that entered into where I lived were flooded and blocked. This is what can happen to you. This is what people need to know. This is why we need to not only care, but work towards perhaps helping so that down the road we don't have to face this again. Anyway, that's my
Absolutely.
thoughts.
No, it can be very personal, straight to home.
Yes, that's it then, very personal. That's important. I'm a sociologist.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
Louise was trying to say something.
Okay, go ahead.
Then you hear about people who just don't believe in science. Have you seen a shift that people are starting to listen more, and that science-based facts are actually, you're laughing. Okay, so you don't see them.
Well, I mean, it's hard to evaluate. Obviously we're in such a
We're in a bubble.
polarized moment.
Yeah.
I mean, when COVID arrived, I had a period of hope that a silver lining might be we saw science develop vaccines and help people to see what they needed to do to avoid the danger, and it worked, and we would have a newfound respect for listening to scientific authority. But I think it's, as it's played out, it seems to me that the people who already had that respect, it stayed or strengthened for the most part, and the people who didn't went in the opposite direction. So it'll take more time to tell. I think what the net effect will be. I can't say I see any particular swing, except this, just unfortunate environment, like that we're in right now.
Okay, thank you. Sad.
If since we're at a Jewish event, right? If a Jew could be elected the president of Ukraine and the vice president and the mayor of Kyiv, and then the leader of one of the world's largest and most powerful nations can say that Ukraine is run by Nazis and that's why I'm invading, and succeeding with that message, at least for his local constituents to some degree. I mean, I don't know if he's succeeding, but we're in a moment of such abuse of information channels and propaganda. It is challenging for us in the fact-based community. But I think, I do feel that prevails in the long run, right? In the long run, because there is empirical truth behind it, but we're in a difficult moment. I think Peter had a comment on there.
I would just like to add that my observation is that in 2006, which is 16 years ago, Al Gore produced his movie An Inconvenient Truth, which he projected all that's happening now. And nobody took him, well, a few people took him seriously, but not a lot. They laughed him off the court. And I think we have to recognize that, in fact, it is still an inconvenient truth that we need to recognize.
Yeah. I know someone who's been working on this since the 1970s, working on climate change since the 1970s.
Yeah.
Is there a certain percentage of the world that has to, I don't want to say go along with this, but I mean, we certainly know there are some countries that are probably ahead of the US. There are some countries that are far behind us, but it is a global problem. It's not just a US problem. So how do we approach this globally? I know you were at the International Global Warming Conference. What is your perspective from an international standpoint?
Well, China is by far, the #1 player, and they're challenging and interesting because we're obviously at a moment of pretty great rivalry. But at the same time, their leadership does clearly recognize climate change and its danger. They're the world's largest manufacturer and installer of renewable energy. But they also happen to be the world's largest creator of coal plants and user of coal at the same time, right? Because it's just so big. So it's hard at this point to be in a position of influence with respect to China, but I think everything that our federal government can do to bring China along, and they worked hard to at least produce something of a statement at Glasgow. That's hard, but then you kind of go by order. You think of different countries in terms of how much they pollute, but also the kind of persuasive power maybe that they have, or economic power. So India is a place that a lot of philanthropies and nonprofits and others are looking at because it's the world's #3 emitter and they're rapidly developing, and a lot of it's dirty energy. So how can we help India to take a clean energy path? And there are lots of others, but I think the good news is that there are a lot of places in the world right now where, if you're going to build new energy capacity, actually, people don't realize this. New solar is cheaper than new coal. New wind is cheaper than new coal now, almost everywhere in the world, and the prices are still going down. There are some places where new solar is cheaper than existing coal. That is, it costs more to dig up coal and burn it in an existing coal plant than it does to make new solar panels and install them. Mm-hmm. So there is hope on the economics. And in that sense, I think there are things that the US government has done that have been extremely effective globally. Basically, innovation that I'm not a believer that technology solves all, but nonetheless, decades of US government subsidizing the development of technology effectively in kind of wind energy and solar energy lowered the cost again and again and again, and got us to this economic moment where it's actually the cheapest alternative, and the cost is continuing to drop. So I think if there are things that, in this nation we can do to continue to, innovate technologically, but also drive costs of clean energy and other clean technology lower, that will have global impact. And I still think we've lost a lot over the last 5+ years, but we're still probably a pretty important model in the world, that if the US is, if we're doing a lot in our own house, it's a lot easier for others to follow, because a lot of, a growing amount of carbon pollution is in less wealthy, less developed countries. China is developing, but a lot of it is not that rich, right? Their per capita emissions are still way below ours. India, obviously, their per capita emissions are really low. And it's really, the prevailing feeling is, hey, rich countries, you got rich burning fossil fuels. Like, what right do you have to tell us what our path of energy development should be, especially when you're still burning dirty fuel? So I think if we can get rid of burning dirty fuel, that's a positive. And obviously there's more, right? There's actually providing aid to countries that are being hurt the most by climate change already, and things like that.
Oh, great
Okay,
conversation.
one
You got
more
something?
observation. Sorry, one more observation. I've talked to several solar panel companies who are offering me to put solar panels up at minimal cost. And they've all come and looked and measured, and they had a drone over the house. And they said, well, we can't really do it unless you cut down some trees. So I give it up.
I'll give you my take on that. Jenny might have a different perspective. Here's the thing about solar. Putting solar on your own roof, it's a great thing to do. It's really nice. I would argue, but it's also really expensive, like on the whole. I don't know if it is expensive to you personally, but when you compare the cost to putting solar in a large scale industrial solar facility, it's like 10 times as expensive. So if you looked at the national level for what are we going to do to get on solar and away from other energy sources, the answer is not, well, the cheap answer is not to put it on a rooftop. You might want it there, again, to show your neighbors. You might want it there to charge your own to feel you have energy security and hook up to a battery. But you could do just as well by paying, you can pay companies to basically bring you solar electrons in through the grid. So that economically you can assure that you are subsidizing solar power. And in fact, it's a lot cheaper than the solar power on your rooftop. I don't know how it works out in the balance sheet for you, but in the macro, people are getting profit.
No,
in the macro, it's cheaper. So I would protect the trees. I would don't cut down a tree.
No, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
no,
thank you. That's
I
a
totally
good point.
agree with you. And I have the same problem, Peter. I've got 4 trees shading my house, so there's no solar for me either. But that's why we work to bring the renewable energy to everyone through the Princeton Community Renewable Energy Program. So most, I think the initial thing was 7,500 residents or households had renewable, 50% renewable energy, which is twice the standard of your normal electricity. So, and we like that idea, like Ben was saying, because it supports the growth of solar in these industrial sites, large scale sites, on top of warehouses, on top of brownfields, anything like that. And right in our backyard, it's happening in our regional electric power grid. So we think that's important. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I love your interest, and we're all in this together. So this is great.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. And I grew up with 2 Siamese cats, so I'm enjoying the one on your lap, Louise. All right.
They
Thanks.
talk a lot.
Thanks again, Freddie
All
and
right.
Jenny, for organizing this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. It's great to see all of your graphics again and get reminded of all the great work you're doing.
Where are you based, Ben? I can't.
Oh,
I
we're
missed the
right in
introduction.
we're right in Palmer Square.
Oh, okay.
Well, thank you again for the good work you're doing.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for the joint program. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
Great.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.